Good afternoon, this is Media Center Ukraine, Odesa, and we continue our work. Today you can watch us online on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook page. And if you have any questions, you can ask them online. Just scan the QR code that you can now see on your screen. And now we are discussing the key violations of the rights of Ukrainians in the temporarily occupied territories. Our guests are Vira Yastrebova, lawyer, director of the NGO Eastern Human Rights Group, and Iryna Chaura, human rights activist. Good afternoon. Let's start with the labor. I know that on the occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, the labor obligation is envisaged. Good afternoon. Thank you for the possibility to inform about the violations of human rights in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Yes, there is a fact that the occupiers in the occupied territories of Ukraine, Luhansk and Donetsk regions, plan to introduce compulsory labor for the workers of the enterprises and organizations, like several months per month. So these are like free working days, and the occupiers are not going to pay for that. This will be also with regard to administratively detained persons. And for the whole time of the detention, the people will have to work for occupiers without any payment. Prisoners also will be involved in such compulsory labor in the temporarily occupied territories. And there is a question, why do they want to do that? They want to accumulate labor resources because to restore the destroyed temporarily occupied territories, there are not so many Russians who are willing to do that. And just to save resources and money, they want to use people as slaves. Thank you. There has been also information that there were the cases of supply of water of bad quality, also in the occupied territories of Luhansk and Donetsk regions, and there were the cases of poisoning among locals. The situation with the water supplies in the temporarily occupied territories is very difficult. And in the temporarily occupied territories of Luhansk and Donetsk regions, there have been recorded cases of poor quality water supply. The water supplied has a persistent smell of sewage and swamp, so this water cannot be consumed. Taking into consideration that there is no alternative source to receive fresh water, locals several weeks consumed that poor quality water. And that's why in Donetsk, Янакиево, Снижно, Торец, Хрустальный, and the former Krasny Luch, Fashivka, Zorinsk, people were poisoned by the water. And because the local occupation administrations just did not want to pay money to buy quality reagents to purify water. That's why the water has not been properly processed, resulting in poisoning of people. And in Luhansk and Donetsk regions, the locals in mass refer to hospitals with the signs of poisoning. But in local hospitals, no services are provided to civilians because the priority there is to treat injured occupiers. That's why They just give advice through mobile phones to use medication, but there is also the lack of medication. And people try to survive under such conditions. There is no alternative source for fresh water. And we can see increased prices for fresh water. Thus, in the Lugansk and Donetsk oblasts, there are increased prices for drinking water, which is sold at retail to local residents. And it costs 7-8 rubles per liter, so it's 3 hryvnias 28 kopecks for 1 liter. The occupiers have created the problem themselves, reducing the reagents. And so the water is poisoned, and now they try to earn money through locals, forcing locals to buy water, but the prices are increased. That's how the occupiers get rich on the locals. Thank you. Let's get to the medical area. I know that in the temporarily occupied territories there is the critical shortage of medical personnel, and there are significant issues with the ambulances. Iryna, can you share more details with us? Yes, the situation is really very difficult. There is the catastrophic shortage of doctors, in particular surgeons, therapists, pediatricians, neurologists, endoscopists, ophthalmologists, ultrasound doctors, and gynecologists, neurosurgeons, etc. Most of local doctors they moved from the temporarily occupied territories, and some doctors were forcibly mobilized. That's why in the hospitals that is still functioning, there is only medical personnel that treats only wounded occupiers. As for the situation with the ambulances, it is also difficult. The representatives of the occupation administration asked the federal center to send them groups of ambulance drivers. But in the regions of the Russian Federation, after the mobilization, there is also shortage of drivers, and drivers are needed on the ground. Also, the drivers of ambulances who remained on the occupation complain that they are registered as handymen and do not have any benefits of medical workers. Vira has mentioned the increased prices for fresh water. And what about the prices for food products in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions? In the course of monitoring the situation in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, we learned about the sharp increase in prices for products and essential goods over the past few weeks by an average of 22%. For example, in the temporarily occupied Donetsk region, the price of milk increased by 9%, butter price by 15%, margarine price by 12%, beets 22%, drinking water by 19%. The occupation authorities import products from the Russian regions. And because of the logistics costs, the prices of products increase, thereby displacing local farms and enterprises from the market. During your briefings, you constantly emphasize that the salary has not been paid to miners. What is the situation with coal enterprises there? In the temporarily occupied territory of Luhansk and Donetsk regions, a program for liquidation of the coal industry was adopted. In 2024, the occupiers plan to completely close all mines and transfer them to dry preservation. 90% of coal mines have already been abandoned. The occupiers dream of giving 10% of the remaining mines to so-called investors, whom plinths are non-existent today. Moreover, the occupiers don't want to repay the debts owed to the miners in the occupied territories. And also, we've seen a new stage of forced mobilization among miners. Is that big? How long have they not been paying? Since May. Since May, they have been failing to pay salaries to the representatives of mine industry. So from May to November, the present day. Vira, there has been information that water pumping doesn't work in the temporary occupied territories, and the mine water has come to the surface. Is this true? There is a huge environmental risk. My colleague has mentioned that mines are closed. But the closure of mines envisages its preservation with the proper water pumping. But as of today, the mines that have been liquidated by occupiers, there we can see that emerging of the mine waters to the surface. And the depth of mine is gained from 700 to 1500 meters. Since the start of the occupation, the water has risen to this level. And this is just in the streets. Thus, in the village of Cholkivka, Donetsk region, instead of a road, they have a pond of mine water. And it should be noted that the mine water is very dirty. And when it comes to the surface, it can poison the soil. This is not just water, even technical water. This is a very dangerous liquid that can lead to environmental disaster. And we understand that all these issues are not properly managed, leading to the consequences that we can now see. At the same time, the Russian Federation in the occupied territories is getting ready to demonstrate that everything's fine and is preparing for the 2024 presidential elections. And they plan to hold elections of the president on the 17th of March 2024. And they have started preparations, and the Central Election Commission of the Russian Federation plans to produce a total of 4,737,000 ballots for the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, namely for Donetsk region 2,013,800 ballots, for Luhansk region 1,683,700 ballots, Zaporizhzhia 496,200 ballots, and for the temporarily occupied territories of the Kherson region, 543,300 ballots. These are the occupiers' plans. The number of ballots is identical to the number declared by the occupiers during local pseudo-elections in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. And the number of declared ballots is not in line to the number of voters in the temporarily occupied territories. So they just want to demonstrate that seemingly everything's fine, that people still reside there. But we can see the challenges they face. I won't be surprised if all the ballots have been already filled in, or they will be filled out properly after the so-called presidential elections. Yes, this is the falsified election process, but this is the not new approach for them. There has been information that in the village of Maslovka, the occupiers shot two locals. Do you know in details about that? Yes, unfortunately, in the temporarily occupied territory of the Kherson Oblast, local residents Iryna Baranova and Alexandra Bendarenko were shot in their house. Local residents report that they saw the people in the uniform of the occupation army of the Russian Federation entering the house, and now Vitaly Filipov and Andrei Safron, servicemen of the occupation army, are suspected in committing that crime. There is also information that in the temporarily occupied territories of the Kherson Oblast, a 15-year-old boy was detained for treason. Yes, a 15-year-old boy, Daniel Klukin, was detained in the temporarily occupied village of Shaslivtsin in the Kherson region. He is accused of treason. On the 13th of November, the occupiers conducted illegal research of the house where the teenager lives and detained the boy. Despite the fact that Danila is only 15 years old today and the criminal responsibility under the article begins at 16, the occupiers still threatened imprisonment from 3 to 8 years. And unfortunately, it is not known where Danila is now. Let's get back to harvesting. We know that the occupiers harvested, finalized the harvesting campaign, and what happens with it further on, as I understand, that they just steal Ukrainian harvest. Yes, the occupiers harvested crops in the temporarily occupied fields of Ukraine. The total amount of sunflower from Ukraine fields is 1,756,400 tons of plants from an area of 1,227,000 hectares. The largest amount of sunflower was harvested in the temporarily occupied Zaporizhia region, 726,600 tons of crops. Harvesting of corn for grain is also underway. The occupiers have already harvested 121,400 tons of corn from the general area of 29,970 tons per hectare. In total, they plan to collect more than 140,000 tons of corn. And in the future, all these harvested crops are brought to the territory of the Russian Federation, so they steal it de facto. I have a question about the forced mobilization of Ukrainians in the temporarily occupied territories. I think that there is intensification. Yes, the occupiers started the practice of announcing wanted people from the temporarily occupied territories of the Russian Federation. Because to force them to participate in the military aggression of the Russian Federation. And today, they control internal checkpoints. And unfortunately, as of today, there have been cases of detention of locals, and they are sent to the military commissariats of the occupiers. As for children in the media center during your press conferences, we have been constantly discussing the militarization of Ukrainian children in the temporarily occupied territories. Could you just share updates? Yes, the militarization process never stops. And we can see the increased number of military training lessons for students of grades from the 1st till 11th. I should say that so-called lessons are conducted by the representatives of the occupation army. And they talk to children, they try to explain them how important it is to fight, how everyone needs to learn how to use guns. And this is a propaganda, and they also share the practical skills of how to use weapons. So, and they start with the small children from the first grades. And as for the militarization of younger children, they have developed a new project which is called the Орлята России, this little eagles of the Russian Federation. And this is the school of young commanders. And we can see that in Genichinsk, and the occupiers held the so-called ceremony of initiation, and they just present the badges of the so-called detachment. And children who were involved in the ceremony are aged 7 to 10. The occupiers also created the School of Young Commanders of the Russian Federation as an additional stage of militarization. Such a school was opened in the next Crimea. Children are taken there and having previously been forcibly enrolled in the so-called youth army. The children in that so-called camp are the residents of the temporarily occupied territories of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions. Teenagers from the temporarily occupied territories are trained there and they learn the basic military knowledge. There is fire training, and in fact, this proves that occupiers are preparing teenagers to join the armed forces of the Russian Federation, the occupation army, as soon as they reach the age of 18. We hope that they will fail, that by that time we will have all our territories fully liberated, as well as people there. And as far as I know, that occupiers continue forcibly deport the population to the Russian Federation. Yes, this process is continuous. And we can see that forwards of the Dniepransky psychoneurological boarding house are deported to Penza. The so-called Minister of Labor and Social Security of the temporarily occupied territory of the Kherson region, Alla Barkhatnova, is involved in the process under the management of Lvova Belova, which is known to be involved in the deportation of Ukrainian children. This means that, unfortunately, the occupiers continue deporting locals. And this is not only about children. Thank you very much for joining the Media Center Ukraine Odesa today. Thank you very much for recording the crimes of occupiers in the Ukrainian territories. Thank you. We'll continue at 1 p.m. We are going to have a round table dedicated to the 10th anniversary of the start of the Revolution of Dignity.